this is definitely better.
Okie doke.
Yeah, so you'll probably get a notice there about the recording.
I
Just make
did.
sure that,
Okay. Again,
but
my apologies for having AirPod difficulties.
no, that's fine. I don't see your video. Maybe it needs to be activated. I'm not quite sure.
You don't see my video.
There we go.
Here I am.
Perfect. Fantastic. Okay, well, that's all right. This is how it goes. I mean, technical difficulties are in some ways the par for the course, right? But it's still it's put it this way. I mean, being able to talk and meet like this, even though we're in different cities, that's pretty cool just by itself.
Well, thousands of miles away. I'm in Austin, Texas, and you're in
I love Austin.
Vancouver. Yeah, I love Vancouver.
Yeah, we have great friends in Austin. We were there for Thanksgiving last year. Not last year, the year before last. It was awesome.
Good.
Yeah, I have a 7-year-old, and so he was 6 at the time. Yeah, and so he had a lot of fun. We went to the Thinkery downtown there, and the library is unbelievable. I love the Austin.
Our new
library.
public library is awesome. The Thinkery is awesome. I work out with a retired lawyer was part of a group who moved the Thinkery. It used to be just the Austin Children's Museum, and they said, let's make this better. And man, they really made it wonderful. And it's packed all the time. It's always packed.
Yeah, it's so great. It was a really fun trip. We had amazing food. The barbecue was just incredible.
Did you make it to Franklin's barbecue, or did you just have regular barbecue?
Well, we went to Interstellar, which was definitely not regular. That was fantastic.
There are so many good ones. It's just amazing that we just have so many different good barbecues. And now Austin's a foodie place too. We've got 5 Michelin star restaurants, and it's, all this Joe Rogan, Elon Musk tech stuff came into town, and they sort of modernized everything. It's not just a college football town anymore.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? But I think that, it's such an interesting kind of because our friends moved there from Kentucky a few years ago, and they love it. And part of the reason was, for the tech industry, because he's got a startup of some kind. And but I mean, it's great. They've got young kids as well, and so it was really neat, and it was good to see that they're in Liberty Hill, and it was really cool to see all the neighborhoods and that it's just growing unbelievably there. By the looks of it.
It's gangbusters. We're past 1 million now.
Wow.
And people have gone north to Georgetown, and just the growth is phenomenal.
Yeah.
We've been here 25 years. I did my training in Dallas and Houston, and met my husband in Houston, and we had all our kids there. And then later moved to Austin, but we love Austin.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I can't wait to go back. We're thinking that we were going to try and impose ourselves and make it an annual Thanksgiving trip. They come up to Whistler in around spring break, so shortly coming up. So we'll be able to see them. We're looking forward to it.
Good. Well, when you are in Austin next time, give me a buzz and I'll say hello.
That'd be great. Yeah, absolutely.
Or show you around somewhere. Take you out to eat in one of the new restaurants.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds great. Really. Yeah, definitely. So thanks again for this. I was thinking, I don't know, maybe the first thing to check is, do you have a hard exit that you need? Because usually 60 minutes, 90 minutes, maybe something like that. Yeah,
that's fine. I don't think people listen to podcasts much longer than 60 minutes. So.
No, I agree. Yeah.
But I'm at your disposal.
Thanks very much. I'll try
I have my afternoon cup of coffee.
yeah, exactly. Same here. I know I've had this thing. I'm switching to decaf after the first one in the morning. See how that goes. I'm noticing I'm a little less jittery around this time of the day now. So it's good.
That's good. Well, it affects my sleep if I have it any later than this. So
totally. Yeah, definitely. No, that sounds great. So let's aim for finishing in an hour, and then.
All right.
Yeah, but I think otherwise, I'll say that I just want to make sure that you have as much control over the production as I do. And so I'll send you a copy of the private link, and then you can have a look through it. If there's anything you want omitted, or you have some suggestions about the edit, by all means. And then or worst case scenario, for some reason you don't want it published at all, that's totally fine also. So
Okay.
yeah.
No, we'll be good. Do you, who is your audience? Do you know? Is it?
Well, it's growing. I mean, it's very, I'm just, as you can see, I'm just starting out with this. And so it's intended, a combination really. It's intended, well, for prospective clients who are interested in our programs with our clinic. I'm just starting up a transcranial direct current stimulation clinic.
I saw that on your website. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just an interesting kind of thing. I mean, I've trained, I've had the typical kind of legacy neurostimulation training with ECT and then TMS more recently. But the thing is, you can imagine with TMS is that there's a lot of kind of upfront capital costs in terms of setting up a clinic. But with these newer options, it's much more cost effective and affordable for people. And so I'm still hospital based in my practice. So I don't really want to have a huge commitment in terms of a private clinic at this point. And in Canada, there's some nuances in terms of how that has to be navigated as well in terms of our regulations. So yeah, it's just a little bit of a side project. So there's the public sort of client side, but then there's also neurostimulation, neuroscience researchers and clinicians who might eventually get interested. So I'm trying to balance that and see how it goes. I'm going to be going to a neurostimulation conference in a couple of weeks, actually, in Japan. So do some networking there and see if people are interested in the podcast. That's the sort of thing.
Nice. Yeah, a lot of more academic podcasts I hear draw from global audiences. The American audience is sort of, they want celebrities and silly stuff like that. But when I talk with folks who have a more academic podcast, they say they've built a global audience.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense for sure. So, so we'll see. I mean, it's more of just honestly, just like a personal side project that I'm interested in. It's just been really neat to just talk to people and meet people and network. Right. So I think the whole podcasting phenomenon is really cool in that sense of what the internet was, I think, originally supposed to try and foster in terms of just broadening people's communities and connections. And so it's been really fun.
Yeah, it does do that. I have to admit, it does do that. I still like reading the news, not listening to it so much, but.
Yeah, I do. And, I try to not to commute too much in the car, but when I do, or if I'm working out or what have you, I'll typically throw on a podcast or an audiobook. So, but it's nice to have both options. I agree. I like reading, although I recently had to cave and get reading glasses. So,
so you're officially over 40.
That's right. Definitely. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Do you have a set of questions that you want to ask?
I was just going to say, I mean, I'm happy to just keep it kind of freewheeling, but I have a handful of questions in case we get a little bit stalled in terms of the discussion. But like the main topics, I was just going from your bio. And so I was going to maybe ask you a bit about neonatology and, work-life balance and motherhood, your book particularly, physician burnout and resilience kinds of issues. And then, that type of thing. Is there anything in particular that you're hoping to cover?
That's all fine. My specialty is kind of working mom burnout, a little more so than physician burnout, but it's all good. No, that's great.
I think that'd be really great to focus in on that. I think that's such an important topic. And then if there are specific things that you want included in the show notes, like links to any content or where people can find your book, and
great.
We can figure that out by email afterwards and
good.
Get it going. I mean, usually at this rate, it'll probably end up being posted in 2 or 3 weeks, something like that.
Okay.
So I'll just do a little bit of an intro here and get rolling. So.
Okay.
All right. Welcome back to the Neurostimulation podcast. Today we have a truly special guest, Dr. Susan Landers. Dr. Landers is an expert in neonatology with over 30 years of experience caring for some of the most vulnerable patients in the NICU. She's also a mother of 3 and an author of So Many Babies, a book that dives deep into her personal journey of balancing a demanding medical career with motherhood. Beyond her clinical experience, Dr. Landers is a passionate advocate for working mothers, and she's written extensively about physician burnout, resilience, and wellness. She's also published 2 ebooks on burnout and recovery, offering valuable insights for professionals navigating the pressures of work and life. Today, I'm really excited to talk with her about her experiences in neonatology, the challenges of being a working mother in medicine, and strategies for preventing burnout, something that unfortunately is increasingly relevant in today's healthcare landscape. Dr. Landers, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the invitation. I'm looking forward to this.
Great, so am I. So neonatology, so fascinating. I mean, I have somewhat distant memories of neonatology rotations in mid school, and I'm just, on the one hand, understanding of how that drew you to that fascinating field, but perhaps you can share with us, what drew you to neonatology and what has kept you passionate about that field and the extension into writing about and advocating for working mothers over the years.
Well, I began to be interested towards the end of medical school in pediatric surgery. And an older pediatric surgeon professor of mine said, oh, this is really not a good specialty for a young lady. This was back in the 70s. And he said, why don't you go into pediatrics? And then if you still want to do surgery, you can take it from there. And in my pediatric residency in Dallas, Texas, at Parkland Hospital, I fell in love with neonatology because it was not only intensive care, which I just felt energized with, but it was taking care of moms and families too. There's nothing more tragic, more traumatic than a mom, a family who has a baby who requires intensive care, the NICU, neonatal ICU. Sometimes we take care of sick newborns who are born apparently healthy and come down with an infection or have an unexpected congenital defect, congenital heart, kidneys, lungs. Most often in the NICU, we're taking care of premature infants, those who are born too early. And there are lots and lots of reasons for premature birth, but your listening audience may be surprised to hear that 10% of births are not perfect, healthy term newborn babies. So 1 in 10 babies will either get sick or be premature or need NICU care. Even babies who are 4 or 5 weeks early can sometimes need the NICU. Those are called late preterm babies. And I grew to really love the different sorts of problems that NICU babies presented. Not only did they have to develop their lungs, an artificial surfactant, which we gave them, helped that a bit, but they had to develop their intestinal systems. And it took us several decades to figure out how to feed them breast milk, mom's own milk, and sometimes donor human milk to protect their gut and help them grow. We have to fortify that milk. All those studies took almost a decade to figure out how to best fortify human milk. And then we figured out that giving steroids to the mom ahead of delivery would prevent brain hemorrhage, would increase survival. And so it's been a specialty where lots of advances have happened in my 30 years of experience. And it's still a very intimate specialty. And what I mean by that is I could go to delivery of preterm triplets, 24, 25 weeks gestation, maybe a mom that had IVF. And I can be at the delivery and I could admit the babies and take care of them for 2-3 months. If everything is fine, send them home. And so I get to be part of that family through that whole process, supporting the mom, making sure she's not getting depressed, talking with her about breast milk expression, answering questions, talking with her about maternity leave and plans for when the babies go home. And I have so many families like that still send me pictures of their kids. I was shopping in Nordstrom for some jeans last summer, and one of the ladies came up behind me and she said, she tapped me on the shoulder, "Are you Dr. Landers?" I said, "Yeah." She said, I'm Gabe's mom. I went, are you Gabe's mom? Gabriel Nix, I shouldn't use his last name. Gabriel is 18 years old now and had graduated from high school and was going off to college. He was a baby that was very sick, and he was in the NICU for 6 months.
Wow.
Really sick, chronic lung disease, lots of problems. And I don't think he was a tiny preemie. I think he was like 27 or 28 weeks. Anyway, he turned out to be perfectly normal after a 6-month hospital stay.
Yeah.
And that mom stood there at the checkout counter and said, this doctor saved my son's life.
Oh.
And I thought, wow, I mean, I hadn't heard anybody say it just like that. And I was already retired, but it reminded me of how crucial NICU care can be. You know, people are so scared when their baby is sick, when their baby has to go in the NICU. And if you know what you're doing technically to heal the baby and to help the baby grow and recover, that's one thing. But helping the families deal with that trauma, that grief, that isolation, I found really, really fulfilling. It was almost as wonderful to me to be there for the moms and dads as it was to practice intensive care medicine on the babies. So it was a field that really filled me up as a physician. Now, Michael, it was also really, really, really stressful.
Sure. Yeah, I can imagine.
And in the early years, there were some deaths, many deaths, way less now than there used to be. And that was hard. It was really hard to see parents so devastated and to spend hours and hours and days trying to save a child's life and lose them. Survival rates are much better now than they used to be. The hours were long and hard. There were usually 10-hour days or 24-hour call shifts. When we got smart about night call and figured out how detrimental it was, we would do 15-hour call shifts. And even now, residents are limited in the amount of time they can spend in the hospital because we know that intensive time in the hospital is so detrimental and so stressful to healthcare providers. But I went through all those phases of staying in the hospital 24 to 30 hours and being stressed out, and then coming home to my family. I raised 3 kids with my husband, who's also a physician. And it was hard in the beginning to figure out how to juggle work and being a mom and a wife. I didn't think that I was prepared for how hard that balance was.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can imagine. I think thank you for sharing your story. I mean, it's very, very interesting. And I can imagine how challenging that was to find that balance. I think part of what, going through, I mean, I certainly went through this, and I know lots of colleagues who did it. It may in fact be universal, dare I say, but this whole idea of when you go through school and you're plugged into a program and you year over year, you climb the ladder and then you kind of finish up and then you start working and you feel kind of on this treadmill. Soon it can get real overwhelming when you have other obligations and family, young children. So balancing all of that can be extremely challenging. And I think part of the risk strikes me for high functioning people. Well, I mean, it's people of all kinds, but I guess it's more the challenge that perhaps when people feel as though, I think part of it, now that I'm kind of thinking out loud here, is that, as they say, it takes a village to raise a child, but these days we don't really have so much access to that village, right?
No, not at all. And when I started, now let me say something about that's important, that women are beginning to tune back into. When I started, I had a husband who was also a pediatrician, a pediatric nephrologist. And so he was really good with the kids when I was on call away at the hospital. Child care didn't scare him. And we could afford to have a nanny never live in. She was just there during the days when we were gone to work. But we really worked together. I had to ask him to help me with certain things. And we had to balance our call schedule. That wasn't good for our marriage, but it was good for raising kids. And it took me about 7 or 8 years of marriage and 2 kids to figure out how to insist that my husband would help me with certain things. The other thing I learned during my first decade of being a mother and a full-time doctor was my girlfriends at work, my pediatric ICU colleagues and my pediatrician friends, we all got married, we all had babies at the same time, and we shared with each other all those struggles, all that, how are you managing this? And how'd you get your husband to help with that? And what about this? And that support system for me was what made a huge difference. If I had not had my colleagues at work, other women, friends who were going through the same thing, I would never have survived. I was lucky to have a supportive husband, but I'll tell you, I didn't live anywhere close to my family, and I don't know if my mother would have helped anyway. They visited often enough, but you really do feel like you're on your own if you don't have a support system. That's probably the most important thing for women, to not feel isolated if they're working and being a mom.
Yeah, well, that's super helpful to hear, and it doesn't surprise me at all. Although it's completely understandable how that might not be accessible for a lot of parents because of this whole idea about, in some ways, having a young child can be very isolating, and remaining socially active for the parents is almost at the lower end of the priority list, and that's often something that gets overlooked. But it's super important, as you say, and so whether it's, I can think of, in particular, I think a lot of faith communities probably would have some sort of a parent and mom and dad group available for building in that kind of community support. And even online, I think in a pinch, that's one of the advantages maybe of Facebook groups and stuff, and just bringing people together. Because if you're in some way able to connect with other new parents or parents who've got a number of young children, and you can share challenges, you can support one another, and having that peer support is really important.
Yeah, I want to say a word to your listeners about Facebook groups and Instagram. Facebook groups, whether you're raising a kid with autism or a preemie or just a regular kid or a difficult toddler, and you want other mothers to talk about things, those groups are very helpful. Instagram makes us focus on being in a comparison culture where moms are getting deluged with images of perfect children and perfect households and perfect motherhood, and that just doesn't exist. And I really have grown very unhappy, and I'm on Instagram to keep up with my grown daughters and what they're doing and what they're posting about their kids. It's really harmful, and it's harmful for new mothers. It's harmful for moms who are working remotely at home, who don't have workplace colleagues. Please be careful with Instagram, because it is not real life. If you want to meet up with other folks in Facebook groups and talk about common struggles, that's great. But I really don't think what moms are seeing on Instagram helps them. I mean, maybe people giving advice may help them a little bit, but I find that aspect of social media is more detrimental than helpful.
That's very interesting. I really appreciate your perspective on that. And it makes a lot of sense, because it strikes me that, I'm not a big Instagram user. I'm probably just, partly just the generational thing, but aside from, anyways, I think the issue that strikes me, that what came to my mind as you were describing that and putting that caveat out there, was this notion that perhaps, well, and I know this from personal experience, I think new parents are particularly vulnerable in terms of what the heck am I doing?
Right,
and
exactly.
overwhelmed and vulnerable. And I think I can imagine that adds sort of a particular susceptibility to
It
judging
does.
oneself negatively based on unrealistic things that one sees on social media.
It does. And new moms especially are more susceptible. And I was a new mom too. I was lucky to have a couple of easy babies before I had a difficult one. But if there's not another new mom to talk with, if your mother or mother-in-law are not helpful, if they're critical, if you're isolated, if your husband is not supportive, that really sets up new moms for a really abnormal matrescence. The matrescence, that's the process of becoming a mother. And I, as a neonatologist, trained, double boarded in pediatrics and neonatology, I had big questions when I was a new mom. I had to call my pediatrician and ask him things, and I had big questions about breastfeeding. And I was a relative expert at the time. And so I think new mothers have been set up to think they're expected to handle everything, when in fact that's a period of time when it's the hardest to handle, without help, without support, without a partner, without a good pediatrician or a family practitioner. It was for me, and I knew what I was doing. And I think new moms are given a bad rap by people saying, oh, well, you should know how to do this, or, oh, you should read this baby book about safe sleep and know how to sleep train your baby. That is not true. That none of these things that we learn in motherhood come naturally to us. Because we live in isolated silos. We don't live in villages like we used to as humans. We don't let our auntie and our grandmother and our neighbor help raise our kids like we used to. We're all just in our houses, and we go to work and we come back and forth. And so our culture is very different now. And so moms are expected to do way more than they really know how to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And it's not surprising. It's not surprising because of the vulnerability and the stress, all the overwhelming pressure and the uncertainty of what to do. And that brings the risk of postpartum depression. It's not surprising in many ways. Yeah.
Exactly. It's very, postpartum depression occurs in 1 in 8 pregnancies. It's really significant. And I created a newsletter called Moms Matter on Substack. Some of your listeners may want to check that out, because I wanted mothers to get a perspective of an older pediatrician who's sort of been through it, to talk about the things that women have questions about: matrescence, postpartum depression, finding a support system. How do you exercise when you're working full time and have 2 little kids? How do you de-stress when you're working full time and have 2 little kids? And so I created this newsletter to write things about being a working mom. I just kind of have at it and pull stories out of my past and write about my own experiences, hoping that my perspective, now having been through it, will be helpful to other women.
That's great. That's so valuable. Yeah, I love Substack. I think it's such a great resource. So
yes, it is.
So what's the title of your Substack again?
Moms Matter.
Awesome. Okay. So Moms Matter, the newsletter,
Yeah.
and then your book, So Many Babies, as well. Maybe, tell us about both of those in terms of the broad strokes of how what you've written to help mothers along the lines of what you've just explained.
When I retired at age 64, I was bored and sort of adrift. I had felt like I had lost my identity as a physician. My kids were all grown and out of the house. And I decided to write a memoir. And I started by telling stories about my favorite patients, that mom of those triplets, and that mom of the kid that was in the hospital for 6 months, and other favorite patients and parents. I contacted all the parents and asked them if I could tell their stories, of course, anonymously. They all said yes. I was really touched. They all said yes. It was like 10 sets of parents. And I started writing down NICU stories because I wanted the public to see what really happened in the NICU. It's life and death, but it's also feelings and trauma and growth and challenges and adaptation. And so I wanted to tell a story about intensive care for babies, and I wanted to tell that story honestly and use my own experience as examples. And I did that. And then my girlfriends in my book group said, well, why don't you write your own experience as being a mom? Why don't you pepper it in there as you were growing and becoming a doctor? And so I went back and added the things that I learned throughout my motherhood experience as those patients unfolded over the 25 or 30 years. And I called my book So Many Babies because it felt like over the years I had taken care of so many babies. I talked about my burnout in that book. I had 2 episodes of burnout when I was working. One was in my 40s when we had moved to a new city for new jobs, and I had just had my 3rd child, and I was totally overwhelmed and didn't adjust well to the change, and developed depression and was burned out then. I had to actually change to a different job. I took a job as a medical director for a small HMO for a couple of years to leave the NICU to try to figure out what I was doing and what I wanted to do. So I got back into the NICU. Later, when I was in my 60s, I developed a more typical physician burnout, where the first thing I noticed was physical exhaustion, emotional overwhelm. There were some cases, some ethical issues in cases that were troublesome. A baby born with a severe birth defect who needed peritoneal dialysis, and there was disagreement between the doctors and the parents. Things like that. And I was really bothered emotionally. And then I noticed that I started getting very sarcastic and very snide and pessimistic, which is also a feature. And finally, I noticed, Michael, that I felt like I wasn't making a difference. I said, this isn't fun. Why am I doing this? It's not making any difference. I had never felt that way before. I had always felt very fulfilled and rewarded from caring for sick babies. And all of a sudden, it just sort of crept up on me. And I just felt kind of worthless. I felt like I'd lost my meaning. So I went to work part-time. I changed my practice location to a low-risk labor and delivery unit. And over the course of about a year, I started to recover. I got into psychotherapy because I wanted to examine the issues that had bothered me. And I started exercising more. I visited with old friends, and we told stories and laughed and had lunch and coffee together. And I started writing. I started journaling about how I was feeling. And it took me literally a year to recover from that burnout that I had let sort of accumulate up into my early 60s. Physician burnout is a real problem. And the pandemic, which I missed, I wasn't practicing during the pandemic. The pandemic really highlighted how badly physicians and nurses were treated because there weren't enough beds. There were so many sick patients. There weren't enough ventilators. Nobody knew how to treat the virus. It was just a terrible situation. Everyone was overworked. Everyone was overwhelmed. And we started to see more and more physician burnout and nurse burnout. And so because of that, I started writing about burnout.
Mhm.
And that helped a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
And then as I was reading and writing about physician burnout, I learned that regular old working mothers, teachers, nurses, secretaries, assistants, accountants, regular old working mothers were beginning to be burned out too.
Mm.
And so I've been spending a lot of time reading and learning about that and talking with younger mothers about why there is now such a prevalence of burnout among working mothers.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's amazing how when you explore one area and you discover that it's not just limited, and it's not surprising, it's not just
Right,
limited, but
right.
parlaying your own experiences in terms of, sharing that and your story and helping others. I think that's really admirable.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, no, for sure. I was just curious. I mean, it strikes me that, I mean, I know even again from personal experience, there's all kinds of conflicting emotions that go along with parenting and trying to balance
Mm-hmm.
work life, self-care, all that stuff. And so, uh, I would say uncomfortable or unnecessary or self-deprecating kinds of feelings like guilt and uncertainty about it really does rock your confidence in terms of what
Yes.
you should be doing or not doing from day to day. So I was just curious, are there specific tips or advice that you might be able to help parents with, or people who are just feeling overwhelmed and perhaps in struggling with their own burnout as far as balancing family and work type obligations?
I think I can. I want to say that maternal guilt is universal. Mothers nowadays want to do everything correctly. I was the same way. I wanted to do everything perfectly, which is, of course, not possible. And children don't grow up like that. I mean, they fling things at us, and they have different kinds of problems, and whether they break an arm or develop dyslexia or turn up with an eating disorder, it's just not easy being a parent these days.
Hmm.
And now we've got all this anxiety and depression among our preteens and teens. So parental guilt is something that will always be there, and moms and dads need to just accept it and move on.
Mm.
Women who are working full-time and like their jobs, like what they're doing, I think should tell themselves, and I learned to tell myself this, I'm good at what I do, and I enjoyed being a physician. And I also really love my children, and I spent every second with them when I wasn't in the hospital. And I was a really good mother,
Hmm.
but I was gone a lot of the time. And so, how did I reconcile those two things? I finally said to myself, I am a good enough mother. I cannot be there 100% of the time.
Hmm.
Nobody is. I mean, I guess a stay-at-home mother is, but I never did that. And I have no experience in that area. My husband used to say to me, why are you so hard on yourself? You're doing fine. You are good enough. And I would say, well, I didn't volunteer for this, or I didn't make cookies for that, or I missed that meeting, or I didn't make it to that swim meet. And I would just inundate myself with these unreasonable expectations. It took me about 10 to 12 years to finally say, I'm being a good enough mother. I am doing the best job I can do with the help I have and the time I have off. My kids are
Mm.
happy and healthy. And so I had to accept that concept of being a good enough parent. And I
Mhm.
think that's important because nowadays parents want to be perfect. They
Yeah.
want to know how to do everything correctly. And there's no such thing. And that's not the way we raise children. Every child is different. It also took me a while to learn to take care of myself.
Mm. Mhm.
When I could come home from work and say to my husband, I'm going to go for a run. I'll be back in 35 minutes. If you'll take care of the kids, and then we can all have supper.
Mhm.
When I did that, I was a better mother and a better doctor. When
Yeah.
I figured out that striking out, getting out of the house, walking around the block, getting out in nature, running, doing whatever made me feel better. When I did that as a priority, not just work, not just children, but me,
Yeah.
I was better at being a mom and a doctor. And that's the other thing that working mothers today are not allowing themselves to do. They're not allowing themselves to have some me time, to say, I really need to go to the gym and do this yoga class with my friend. I really do need to go outside and walk because I'm about to scream. Stress reduction techniques are beginning to be talked about, and I had to sort of figure it out on my own. My husband helped me. He would say things like, oh man, you're so much better when you go run 3 days a week. And so I knew it too. I could tell that my mood was better and my whole framework was better. And he allowed me to have that 35 or 40-minute run 3 days a week. So I think women need to relearn that they are important in their own health, that when they learn how to take care of themselves, how to nourish themselves with a friend, with a coffee, with a class, with a run, with whatever, with playing the piano, with whatever it is, they will be better at being a working mother. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it's really, I really appreciate hearing your wisdom along those lines, because it really resonates with my own experience. I think I love the concept of just accepting and letting go, as far as feeling like there has to be perfection, because of course there is no such thing as a perfect parent. And I think in some ways, fortunately, I think I've been able to, like, my youngest is 7 now, and I think I've been able to get to the point where because I'm a pretty conscientious by nature, diligent, conscientious type of person by character. And so I was really stuck in that trap. But after a number of years of just getting to the point that you say, and being able to understand just to let it go. And that is actually something that I think some friends of mine who are similar were able to grow through, in understanding that, hey, we can't control everything. And this goes to speak to some of the issues that are out there in terms of concepts like helicopter parenting and snowplow parenting. The kids are, and another thing actually that helped me along these lines was from the old book, Freakonomics. One of the topics that they were talking about was this idea that, how a child is going to end up has a lot more to do with their genetics than you think. So I kind of thought, well, that part's done. So I can't control that now. And so hands off, and que sera, sera, more of that type of thing. But also just giving ourselves credit as parents for being there and for caring. It's like when we take them to a sports event, and their soccer or whatever, part of what I remind myself is, yeah, if they win, that's great. That's kind of a cherry on the top, but it's just getting them here and being present and cheering them on in life in general, right? So that's been a helpful approach for me.
Yeah. Another thing I discovered along the same lines is I liked really playing with my kids. I don't know if it's just my extroversion, but I like to get out in the backyard and throw the ball and bring out the bat and swing with them and ride bikes with them. And it just made me feel, in a childish way, happier. And I think that's something that a lot of adults forget. And when they discover playing with their kids, they go, wow, this really feels good. That's the other thing modern parents aren't allowing themselves to do as much, I don't think. Having said that, my parents never played with me and never came to school to see anything I did at school or a volleyball meet. And you're right, modern parents, we are being way more helicopter-y than we should be. We are so invested in our children's development, and we want to do everything correctly. And that's not the way raising kids works. And that's not the way working full-time works. If you've had a bad day, it's going to affect the way you interact with your spouse, your partner, your child. It's hard to learn how to de-stress from a bad day and not bring your worries home. The other thing is is really self-care. It's really
Yeah,
parents learning to take care of themselves, not just their kids.
for sure.
Saying to their kids,
Yeah,
mommy needs to go to the gym
yeah.
and the babysitter's going to be here and I'll be back in an hour. And
Mhm.
I'm a happy mommy and we're going to have a better evening if I go to the gym.
Yeah,
And I think that's a hard lesson for parents today to learn because they're trying to be good parents and they've missed the notion that taking care of themselves is part of being a good parent.
yeah, for sure. I love that notion that one of the best gifts you can give a child is them seeing you happy, right, in your own
Yes,
life and
yes.
pursuing your own interests. Because that's the way I kind of, because it took me a while to get to that point as well. But
Yeah,
hearing
yeah,
that advice was really liberating and sort of allowed me to give myself permission to be able to do the self-care and not feel like I had to be on top of everything,
yeah.
and it's
Well, you can't be.
you can't exactly. It
Nobody
liberates
can
you in the
be.
sense that
Right,
it's realistic. You end up getting to a point where it's realistic, and the benefits are then you get to get back into the self-care as much as you can. So yeah,
right,
for sure.
right. So back to my book, So Many
Mhm.
Babies. I wrote that book so that other working mothers would give themselves a break. If they read my story and how I struggled with various things my children had and how I struggled with the work-life balance, I figured they would say, wow, she's a pediatrician. She knew all this stuff and still she struggled that much. So what I'm doing is probably normal. I
Mhm.
want working mothers to feel like everything they're going through is normal. This is difficult. Being a parent today is really difficult. My little 8-year-old granddaughter wanted a Fitbit watch so she could send text messages and call me during the day. And I thought, oh my God, I can't believe this. I said to my daughter, do you really want me to get this for her? And she said, Mom, 2 of her friends have one. And I went, oh no, this is terrible. She'll have an Apple Watch by the time she's 12. Um, and we have so many challenges with technology and children and screen time and television and video games. And it's just different from
Mm.
when I had little kids. You're going to have lots of challenges about the internet and screen time with your kids. Do you have
Mhm.
1 or 2?
Well, I have 3 now, so
Okay,
they're
good.
15, 11, and 7. Oh, sorry,
So
15,
you
12, and 7. So
so you've already been there.
yeah, yeah, but it does. I mean, for real brand new parents that are watching or listening, it's just a matter of, and I don't know. I mean, I'm hesitating, right? Because I can remember at that stage, kind of the last thing I kind of wanted to hear was unsolicited parenting advice, right?
Exactly. Right.
Nonetheless, I got a bookshelf full of parenting books at home.
Hmm.
So I mean, it's. But what I was going to say is that
Me
when they get to
too.
that point where I have this distant memory of years and years ago, a friend of mine had a kid before I had kids, and I was sort of wide-eyed and amazed. And at some point, I think his oldest was 5 or 6 at that point, and he said, "Well, once they get to be that age, they can kind of start doing stuff on their own." And so now that I realize, yeah, that's a real bonus for sure. Just
It
getting to that
is. It
point.
is when they can dress themselves and feed themselves. And then I love all the stages of childhood because I
Mhm.
love the elementary school years. I love the preteen years. But if you've got girls, they just kind of go crazy in their preteen years. They get mean and they get cliquey and they care what they look like and they care how much they weigh. And that's not even talking about Apple Watches and iPhones and all that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. It's just a big kettle of fish, and every phase of parenting is a new challenge. And
Mhm.
the other thing I tell parents is it's just always going to be something. There are so many different phases. You think you'll have it down when they're 3 or 4 or 5, and then by first grade, it's different. So expect the unexpected.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
just the way it is being a parent.
For sure. Yeah. And I imagine having the Substack newsletter allows for kind of a living documentation so that your advocacy and what you're writing about can can be contemporary in terms of addressing, these types of things that evolve in real time, like the social media
Right.
question and different.
Right.
So having that dialogue ongoing, I'm sure, is very rewarding and for you, and very helpful for your audience.
It has been rewarding. I'm no expert on technology, but I do know a lot about child development, as probably you do. And I certainly know a lot about being a working mom. And so I'm focusing more on those things that are common problems for working moms, parents who, really want to get some meaning out of being parents, not just working for a living and never seeing your kids, but not being stay-at-home parents, trying to do what most people do, which is work and raise a family. And so I do feel like my perspective is valuable. I worry a little bit, just between you and me, Mike, that our culture doesn't value older people's wisdom as much as we used to. I worry a little bit about that, but that may just be me worrying about something that's not a problem.
No, I think it's a valid worry. I mean, I worry about that as well. I think it's part of this whole notion that of the village, not having so much access to the village, not only in terms of the extended family, perhaps, but maybe even some aspects of cultural wisdom is not
Right.
quite front and center as much as it maybe used to be. But again, I think hopefully, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe there's a role for technology to be able to supplement in some sense and give people access to different ideas that might help to support them in the absence of any other kind of more organic cultural support. But yeah, and it's interesting. But I agree with you. I mean, from the perspective, because I work with a lot of seniors, and I do feel that North American society, probably, Western society in quotes,
Right.
that's maybe one of the major risks, is that perhaps lack of integration with the grandparents and the great grandparents, and being able to help to raise kids, right? Because of people living in different cities, or people not necessarily. I mean, we're fortunate that both sets of our kids' grandparents are local here, which has been a real advantage, just in terms of even stuff like free babysitting.
Huge. And I'm one of those free babysitters. I love having my 2 grandchildren in Austin. My daughter is a pediatric ICU nurse practitioner. She works her butt off. Her husband is a product developer at Whole Foods. And I love being around my grandkids, and I love having a good relationship with them. My mother was very far away from me and my kids. And so I feel like I am making a contribution. Now, they don't really want to hear my opinions about very much. But when they ask me, I'm delighted to talk about things like my 3rd child had dyslexia, and my daughter is worried about whether her daughter has that. And she asked me the other day about the signs and symptoms and the evaluation, and told me about talking with her child's teacher. And so I was able to reassure her that it's really scary when you try to figure out what's going on with your child, and is there something else atypical about your child? Are they neurodivergent? Are they dyslexic? Do they have ADHD? Things like that. And so I felt like it might have helped her just to hear that I had gone through some of the same things that she's struggling with now.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. I was curious in terms of, maybe some of your hopes around what your writing and your advocacy work will help to impact in terms of parents in healthcare, mothers specifically. One of the things, we have a new hospital that's being built in town here in Vancouver, and in one of the meetings for medical staff recently, they were talking about how there's going to be a purpose-built daycare facility kind of integrated. And so it struck me that was such a valuable idea to get involved in the construction of a new building like that.
Fabulous. Yeah. One of the biggest drawbacks for working women in the US, probably Canada too, is lack of adequate and affordable childcare. And I think that so many women are working to make enough money to pay for childcare, and it's really kind of sad. And it seemed like we were on a trajectory to begin to talk about parental leave and maternity leave and adequate childcare, and then our elections sort of set us back, so to speak. For those of us who think those are valuable things for society and for government to provide, we're not going to see any of that in the next 4 years, unfortunately, which is a tragedy. So,
yeah,
good for your hospital.
Yeah, I mean, and just it because honestly, that's a key issue, and it's difficult to find daycare spots, and I think, as you say, that ends up
difficult and expensive.
For sure. That's the thing, as you're alluding to, the two-parent trap they talk about, once you get into that whole cycle about having to, it's tough.
Right.
So I'm just curious, maybe before we wrap up, what's next for you? Do you have any new projects, or what direction is your newsletter going in these days?
Well, my newsletters next week is about midlife life transitions, and telling a story of what I went through and giving some tips about how to handle that. I've almost run out of NICU mom baby stories. And those, my audience really likes those. I think people like to read stories about survival and resilience. I've written a couple of ebooks, and I'm going to try to get those published on Amazon or Kindle. I'm not quite sure how to do that yet. I feel like I'm doing more than I need to do since I'm retired. And when my husband looks at me and says, "You don't really need to do that, do you?" I'm starting to think about really kind of pulling back and enjoying exercise, playing mahjong, working word puzzles, being with my grandkids, doing something with my husband. So I do want to enjoy retirement, and I'm not there yet. I'm still trying to reinvent myself, I think, as an advocate for working moms. And maybe I'll get fulfilled and satisfied enough to say, this is good, this is enough. But I really love my newsletter. It's been really fun to hear from other people and write about things that modern moms worry about. Yeah,
no, that's great. I'm so glad to hear that. It's really, I really appreciate you sharing your story and your journey. I mean, I personally have struggled with burnout. I think most healthcare professionals likely have, and navigating that whole mess of compassion fatigue and being able to figure that out is real challenging. So, I would really encourage viewers and listeners to avail themselves of your publications and your writings and the newsletter, and just to take advantage of your wisdom and helping to support people and how they're navigating those challenges as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you for saying that. It's important. It's a big issue for our culture right now, so it is important.
Definitely. And so again, for viewers and listeners, we'll put links to Dr. Lander's content in the show notes. So the book, the upcoming ebooks, or at least some likely places where you'll be able to find those, as well as the newsletter. Right. And anything else that any other links that we can put in the show notes to help to point you in the direction of Dr. Lander's work, we will definitely do that. So is there anything else that you wanted to share with the audience before we wrap up, Susan?
Almost everything is available on my website, susanlandersmd.com. So, and I'll send that to you so you can put the link.
Fantastic. That's great. That makes it easy then. So susanlandersmd.com. Perfect.
That's it. All right.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much once again. Really appreciate it. Fascinating story, great conversation. And thanks again for all your work and advocacy and helping people.
Thank you. Appreciate your interest.
Okay. Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Oh, and so I'll edit this, and then I was just going to say, Susan, you're not thinking about it. I'll edit out the name when you had mentioned the name.
When I said Gabe Nixon, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'll just let you know that I'm not going to publish that, but I'll just edit that out. So I'll just be
Okay.
careful.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. No,
But I
it's
love
interesting
that
though.
story. I love that
Yeah,
story.
no, but it's interesting because part of, as from the physician perspective, it's part of why it's this has been an interesting learning experience for me too, is navigating that whole public facing side of things, right? And saying, because I have to put a disclaimer saying, well, it's not medical advice, it's just educational, and blah, 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 this and that. I mean, it doesn't really protect you, but at least it's out there. But anyways, but it is an interesting thing because there's this kind of inclination for physicians to not be public facing, right? And then, but there's the potential to just help people and increase your reach, right? So just navigating that's been really interesting and kind of fun.
There's a Substack you might like called Are You Okay? I think that's the name of it. Lucy McBride is an internist in DC.
Okay, cool.
And I did a podcast with her on burnout, and she has a great Substack. And it's just kind of talking about health and wellness and answering questions. And she's always got this is not medical advice disclaimer, but she's very popular and people are very interested in hearing what physicians have to say, especially about therapy, because there are not enough people taking advantage of therapy these days. Yeah,
for sure. Definitely. Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I've had my own, and I think it's critical. I think in a way, it's a privilege to have it because it's
it is a privilege.
It's not available to everyone. So
yeah, we're lucky.
Super. Thanks so much again. Really appreciate it. We'll keep in touch.
Yeah. Okie doke. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.